The accusation. The rhythmic scrape of silver against the soft cloth was a familiar comfort to Elara. She hummed a low, tuneless melody, the sound barely audible above the distant clatter from the kitchens. The ornate tray, a relic from a bygone era, gleamed under her ministrations, reflecting the faint afternoon light filtering through the tall window of the servants' hall. Her fingers, calloused from years of toil, moved with practiced grace, coaxing a brilliant sheen from the dull metal. A stray strand of dark hair escaped her braid, tickling her cheek, and she tucked it back with an absent-minded gesture. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old wood, a comforting aroma that had been the backdrop to most of her 20 years. She thought of the small garden plot she tended behind the stable, and the nascent shoots of late-season chamomile pushing through the rich earth. A quiet joy settled in her chest. A rare visitor. The sudden, ear-splitting shriek from the dining hall shattered the fragile peace. It was Lady Annalise, Lord Valerius's youngest daughter, her voice sharp with panic. Elara's heart lurched, the silver tray slipping slightly in her grasp. A flurry of shouts followed, muffled at first, then growing clearer, each word a spike of ice. "He's collapsed! Send for the healer! Dear gods, what has happened?" Elara dropped the tray onto a nearby table, the clatter echoing in the sudden, eerie silence that had fallen over the servants' hall. Her breath hitched. Lord Valerius, a man of formidable presence and even more formidable temper, had been in robust health just that morning. She hurried towards the dining hall, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The scene that greeted her was one of controlled chaos. Servants, usually models of decorum, scurried like startled mice. Lady Valerius, a woman of perpetually fluttering hands, was now wringing them violently, her face ashen. Lord Valerius lay sprawled across the polished oak floor, his usually florid complexion an alarming shade of purple. A half-eaten apple, its white flesh already browning, lay discarded near his outstretched hand. Then, a voice, sharp and accusatory, sliced through the rising panic. The apple! It was Elara who prepared his luncheon, was it not? It was Master Thorn, the Lord's personal steward, his gaze fixed on Elara with chilling intensity. His eyes, usually clouded with indifference, now burned with a sudden, terrible clarity. Elara froze. Her mind raced, and trying to recall the details of the afternoon meal, she had brought him a small plate of fruit and cheese, a light repast before the evening's heavier fare. The apple, a crisp green one, had been flawless. She remembered polishing it herself, ensuring it was free of blemish. I merely served it, Master Thorn," Elara stammered, her voice thin and reedy. The words felt inadequate, hollow. "And who prepared it, girl?" Thorn pressed, advancing towards her. His shadow loomed, eclipsing the last vestiges of light. Who handled it before it reached his lordship's plate? A ripple of whispers spread through the room, each murmur a poisoned dart. The quiet one, always so serious. Who knows what goes on in their heads? I cut it, Elara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But there was nothing amiss. A cold dread began to seep into her bones, replacing the initial shock. This was not just an inquiry, it was an inquisition. Lady Annalise, her face streaked with tears, pointed a trembling finger at Elara. "She was always lurking, always watching us. She hated my father, I know it." Her voice rose to a hysterical shriek. "Poisoner! She poisoned him." The word hung in the air, a bell of doom. It echoed off the high ceilings, settling over Elara like a shroud. The faces around her, once familiar, transformed into masks of suspicion and fear. Guards, burly men in the House of Valerius livery, materialized seemingly from nowhere. Their hands, rough and unyielding, seized her arms. "No, I didn't! I swear it!" Elara cried out, twisting against their grip. while the silver tray she had so carefully polished just moments ago now seemed a distant memory, a symbol of a life that was rapidly fracturing. Panic, cold and raw, clawed at her throat. "Please, you must believe me." But no one was listening. The guards dragged her roughly across the polished floor, past the crumpled form of Lord Valerius, past the half-eaten apple that now seemed to condemn her with every brown-edged bite. Whispers followed her, growing louder, more condemning. "Poisoner! A viper in our midst! Execute her!" The stares of the other servants, once merely curious, were now filled with a chilling mixture of horror and revulsion. Elara met their gazes, searching for a flicker of understanding, a hint of doubt. She found none, only judgment. The ornate carvings on the walls seemed to twist into mocking faces as she was pulled through the grand archway, the opulent world of the House of Valerius shrinking behind her. The cold stone of the corridor pressed in, mirroring the icy despair that had taken root deep within her chest. Her throat burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. She would not give them the satisfaction. They thought her a poisoner, a murderer. But they knew nothing. They saw only what they wanted to see. And as the heavy oak doors of the manor slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate, Elara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her life, as she knew it, was over. The silent guardian. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a reverberating thud, its finality echoing through Elara's bones and plunging her into an immediate, suffocating darkness. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and congealed dread, clung to her. Her hands, chafed and raw from rough handling, fumbled along the slick stone wall as she stumbled deeper into the confines of her cell. No straw, no crude bucket, only the relentless cold of the unyielding floor. She collapsed to her knees, the coarse fabric of her servant's dress offering meagre defense against the biting chill that permeated her very core. Hot tears, stinging trails down her grimy cheeks, mingled with the sweat of pure terror. She pressed her forehead against her drawn-up knees, a desperate attempt to shrink, to vanish, to simply cease to be. Poisoner! Lady Annalise's venomous accusation resonated in Elara's mind, a relentless, damning echo. How could they believe such a monstrous lie? Lord Valerius, who had always seemed so kind, if distant, the apple, once a glossy emblem of health in her hand, now a symbol of her utter undoing. She hadn't even tasted it herself. A shudder, independent of the cold, racked her frame, born of the crushing weight of injustice. Her life, meticulously woven around quiet service and an unnoticed existence, lay shattered. Execution. The word, a cold, sharp blade, pierced through her despair. She curled tighter, a miserable knot in the inky blackness, her silent sobs the sole sound in her bleak world. Hours bled into an indeterminate stretch of time. Hunger gnawed, a dull physical ache, but it was overshadowed by the more profound, consuming fear. She must have drifted into a fitful sleep, for a sudden, distinct sniffle jolted her awake. Her eyes, now somewhat accustomed to the gloom, darted towards the solid iron bars forming the front of her cell. A pair of golden eyes, luminous and ancient, fixed on her from the corridor. They belonged to a wolf, massive and impossibly silent, its fur the colour of deepest midnight. Shadow, the Alpha King's wolf, a creature of legend, rarely glimpsed, even more rarely approached, a different kind of shiver, not of cold, but of awe and apprehension, traced its way down Elara's spine. This was no dungeon guard's hound. This was something else entirely. Shadow's head was tilted slightly, its gaze unblinking, almost evaluative. There was no aggression in its stance, no bared teeth or low growl, only an intense, focused observation. Elara, frozen in place, could feel the sheer power emanating from the beast. It was a silent, a formidable presence, filling the narrow corridor with its stillness. She didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. What did it want? Was it a harbinger of her doom, dispatched by the Alpha King himself? Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The wolf remained motionless, its eyes never leaving her. Eventually, exhausted and bewildered, Elara slowly uncurled. She pushed herself back against the far wall, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Shadow merely watched, its golden gaze unwavering. It was a sentinel, a silent guardian in the most unexpected of places. A guard eventually brought a meager meal, a piece of dry bread, and a cup of muddy water. He tossed it through the bars, his face grim, pointedly avoiding Elara's eyes. Shadow remained, a dark, unmoving silhouette behind him. The guard's hand visibly trembled as he hurried away, even the seasoned men of the dungeon giving the Alpha King's wolf a wide berth. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of hunger, cold, and gnawing anxiety. Elara ate the paltry food, drank the foul water, and slept fitfully on the stone floor. And through it all, Shadow remained. He never barked, never whined, never attempted to enter the cell. Though the bars would have posed no challenge to a creature of his strength, he simply was. A constant, watchful presence, his golden eyes her only companions in the crushing solitude. He would sometimes lie down, his massive head resting on his paws, but even then, his gaze never truly left her. In the profound silence of the dungeon, his presence became a strange, anchoring comfort. He didn't accuse her, didn't judge her. He simply watched. And in his silent vigil, Elara found a fragile thread of hope, an unarticulated question in the depths of those golden eyes. Why are you here? It was a question she couldn't answer, but its very existence kept the encroaching despair at bay, if only for a little while. A king's doubt, the heavy grate of the dungeon door echoed through the cold stone, a sound that usually heralded more despair. Elara flinched, instinctively huddling closer to the wall, her gaze darting to where Shadow's golden eyes burned like embers in the perpetual gloom. He was a constant, solid presence, a silent sentinel against the crushing weight of her fate. The clanking grew louder, accompanied by the murmur of voices, deep, authoritative tones that spoke of power and privilege. Then, a new scent drifted into her cell, cutting through the damp earth and stale fear. Cedar and winter frost, sharp and undeniably regal. A tall figure filled the narrow archway, momentarily eclipsing the flickering torchlight from the corridor. King Theron, Alpha of the Lycans, stood framed against the dim glow, his presence an almost physical force. He was broader than she'd imagined, his shoulders filling the space, and his dark hair was pulled back from a stern, chiseled face. But it was his eyes that truly commanded attention. A startling shade of amber, currently narrowed as they swept across the cell. They paused on Elara, then shifted to Shadow, who remained unmoving, his gaze locked on the king. A low growl rumbled in Theron's chest, a sound of recognition, perhaps even surprise. Shadow, Theron's voice was a deep baritone, laced with an edge Elara couldn't quite decipher. Why are you here? The wolf merely blinked, then nudged Elara's hand with his massive head, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture. Theron's gaze sharpened, returning to Elara. She felt it then, a primal assessment, as if he were seeing not just a servant girl, but an anomaly. He stepped fully into the cell, his heavy boots echoing on the flagstones. The air grew colder, thick with an unspoken tension. He moved with a predator's grace, scanning the meagre confines. Her pulse hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching silence. He stopped before her, his scent overwhelming the stale air. He lowered his head, sniffing the air around her, his amber eyes piercing. Elara held her breath, unable to move, unable to even tremble. When he was so close, she could feel the faint warmth radiating from him. She braced herself for the accusation, the judgment, the finality of it all. But it never came. Instead, a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. Elara braced for the inevitable accusation, the pronouncement of her guilt, but it never came. He straightened, his brow furrowed in a thoughtful frown. "She does not smell of guilt," Theron stated, his voice ringing with a quiet authority that cut through the whispers of his entourage gathered just outside the cell. A gasp rippled through the small group. Lord Caelan, the king's most trusted advisor, stepped forward, his face a mask of polite disbelief. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, Lady Annalise's testimony is clear. The poison was found in the tea Elara served. The evidence is irrefutable." Theron's gaze remained fixed on Elara, but his voice was aimed at Caelan. "The scent of fear, yes. Of injustice, certainly. But not the cloying stench of deceit I know so well." He paused, then added almost to himself, "And something else. Something unadulterated." He looked directly at Caelan, his amber eyes hardening. "Shadow does not guard the guilty." Caelan's lips thinned. "A wolf's instinct, sire, however remarkable, cannot override the facts of the court. Her execution is scheduled for dawn." "It is not," Theron countered, his voice low but resonant, carrying an undeniable finality. He turned to the captain of the guard. "Prepare a room in the castle tower, a secure chamber but with light and air. This woman will be moved there immediately." Murmurs erupted from the king's retinue, and Caelan's face flushed. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. To bring a condemned servant into the castle walls, it sets a dangerous precedent, and the Lady Annalise will be outraged." Theron's gaze snapped to Caelan, a flash of warning in his amber eyes. "My decisions are not subject to precedent, Lord Caelan, nor to the whims of Lady Annalise. The girl will be moved, and I will personally oversee the investigation." He then looked at Elara, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Hope, fragile and terrifying, bloomed in her chest. She had been utterly alone, resigned to her fate, and now, the Alpha King, legendary and aloof, was defying his court for her. He offered not freedom, but a reprieve, a chance at something beyond the cold stone and the silent judgment. As he turned to leave, Shadow rose, moving with silent dignity to follow him, but not before brushing his flank against Elara's arm one last time, a comforting, lingering touch that promised a continued vigil. The king's decision hung in the air, a stark challenge to the established order, a beacon of improbable light in Elara's deepening darkness. Tower and whispers. The rough straw of the dungeon cot was replaced by a mattress of surprising softness, the chill damp by a gentle warmth radiating from the stone walls. Elara traced the delicate floral pattern of the tapestry hanging opposite the window, a splash of vibrant colour in her otherwise muted surroundings. This room, high in the castle's eastern tower, was a gilded cage, yet a cage nonetheless. She was still a prisoner, but the clanging of iron bars and the stench of mildew were gone, or replaced by the distant murmur of the castle and the occasional cry of a hawk circling high above. Shadow, ever vigilant, rarely left her door. He would lie there, a dark, silent sentinel, his presence a constant, comforting weight against the encroaching anxiety. One afternoon, a gentle knock preceded King Theron's entrance. He carried no retinue, no guards, only the quiet authority that seemed to emanate from him like a subtle scent. He sat in the carved wooden chair by the unlit hearth, his gaze steady, searching. "Elara," he began, his voice a low rumble. "Tell me again about the night it happened." She recounted the events, the serving of the wine, the sudden collapse of Lady Maeve, the panicked shouts. This time Theron didn't interrupt, simply listened, his silver eyes never leaving her face. He asked about the wine, the chalice, or the other servants present. His questions were soft, precise, like a sculptor gently chipping away at stone to reveal the form beneath. There was no accusation in his tone, only an earnest desire to understand. As she spoke, a strange sense of something akin to trust began to unfurl between them, fragile but present. He wasn't just the king. In these moments, he was simply Theron, a man seeking truth. Outside the tower's relative peace, the castle's political currents churned with renewed vigour, stirred by the cunning hand of Lord Kyle. He moved through the court with a deceptive ease, a smile always ready, a flattering word on his lips. His whispers began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. "A servant girl, held in the tower," he'd remarked to a minor noble, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. Such an indulgence for one accused of so grave a crime. Later, to a group of ladies-in-waiting, he'd sigh. The king's compassion is boundless, of course, but one must consider the precedent. What message does this send to those who would seek to harm the nobility? His words were never direct accusations, but rather carefully planted seeds of doubt, watered with feigned concern. He spoke of the stability of the court, the safety of the Lycan hierarchy, and the potential for unrest if justice was seen to be swayed by sentiment. He painted Elara as an anomaly, a disruption, subtly implying that the king's judgment was clouded by an inexplicable, perhaps dangerous leniency. "One wonders," he mused to Baroness Anya, his voice barely above a whisper, "if there isn't something more to this girl, something that ensnared our king's attention. A hidden charm, perhaps, or a darker influence." He let the implication hang in the air, allowing Anya's imagination to fill in the blanks, knowing full well the rumours that would blossom from such a suggestion. The murmurs grew louder, coalescing into a palpable undercurrent of resentment. The nobility, accustomed to swift and brutal justice for servants, found Theron's actions baffling, even insulting. They saw not compassion, but weakness, a crack in the Alpha's resolve. Kyle watched, a hidden smile playing on his lips, as the court's opinion slowly but surely began to sour against the unknown girl in the tower, and by extension, against the king who protected her. He knew that even a king, no matter how powerful, could not stand against the united will of his court indefinitely. He had merely given them the narrative they craved, a justification for their own prejudices. The trap was set, baiting not only Elara, but Theron himself. Seeds of treachery. The Eastern Tower, with its sun-drenched windows and tapestries depicting ancient hunts, offered little solace when the whispers began. Elara, now permitted the use of a small, well-appointed antechamber, found herself pacing its confines. The sounds of the castle, once a muffled thrum, now seeped through the thick stone walls with startling clarity. One afternoon, a particularly venomous exchange drifted up from the courtyard below, carried on a gust of wind. "And the king, my lords, would have us believe this. Peasant is innocent." Lord Kyle's voice, usually a smooth current, was laced with a feigned outrage that sent a shiver down Elara's spine. A common servant, found with the Lady Maeve on the very precipice of death. What other explanation could there be? Elara pressed her ear closer to the stone, her breath catching. She recognized the murmur of other voices, the sycophantic agreements of courtiers, their fear of Kyle outweighing any sense of justice. "She speaks of a peculiar scent," Kyle continued, his words twisting truth into grotesque caricatures. "A sweetness," she claims. Preposterous. Is it not more likely she possesses some dark art, some sorceress's trick to mask her poison with fanciful tales? The king's leniency. It is unprecedented. Unwise. Each word was a barb, designed to prick at the king's authority, to paint Elara not merely as a murderer, but as something far more sinister, a sorceress. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Elara felt a prickle of fear, cold and sharp. Kyle wasn't just slandering her. He was weaponizing the court's ingrained superstitions, turning their fear against Theron himself. He was weaving a trap, elaborate and cruel, and Elara was merely the bait. Meanwhile, in his own chambers, King Theron gripped the edge of his oak desk, his knuckles white. The weight of the court's growing dissent pressed down on him like a physical burden. Kyle's subtle manipulations, the whispers that followed Theron like shadows, were taking their toll. A cold sickness, familiar and insidious, began to spread through his veins. It was not a fever, but something far older, a chill that seeped into his bones, a darkness that threatened to consume the light from his eyes. He felt a tremor in his hands, a nascent ache behind his sternum. The curse, in dormant for months, was stirring. Each wave of stress, each challenge to his reign, fueled its resurgence. He closed his eyes, drawing a ragged breath, fighting the encroaching frigidity. He could not afford to show weakness, not now. Not when Elara's life and the stability of his kingdom hung in such a delicate balance. The thought of her, small and defiant, recounting the chilling details of Maeve's collapse, brought a flicker of warmth, a counterpoint to the growing coldness within him. He trusted her, an instinct that defied all logic and counsel. He could not explain why, only that her story, unvarnished and raw, resonated with a truth he had long sought. Back in the eastern tower, Elara moved away from the window. The image of Kyle's sneering face burned into her mind. The malicious architect of her downfall, and now, perhaps, Theron's. A strange, unfamiliar protectiveness stirred within her. She had seen the king's public persona, the cold, unyielding alpha, but she had also glimpsed the man beneath, the one who listened, who sought truth. She remembered the subtle shift in his eyes when she spoke of the sweet scent, the quiet intensity of his gaze. Despite her imprisonment, despite the chasm of their stations, a thread had begun to weave between them. She didn't understand it, couldn't articulate it, but she felt it. A silent acknowledgement of a shared burden, a growing awareness of his hidden struggle. The pressure from the court, the insidious machinations of Coil, were not just a threat to her life, but to Theron himself. Elara now knew, with chilling certainty, that this was far more than a simple accusation of murder. This was a battle for the very soul of the kingdom, and she, a wrongly accused servant, was at its heart. The weight of that realization settled upon her, heavy and inescapable. The court's fury. The heavy oak doors of the great hall creaked open, admitting Elara into a maelstrom of hostile gazes. She was led in chains, the cold iron biting into her wrists, a stark contrast to the opulent tapestries that lined the walls. Every noble, every courtier, every guard seemed to hold their breath, their collective animosity a palpable weight in the air. The hall buzzed with hushed whispers, each syllable a barbed dart aimed at her. At the far end, upon the raised dais, King Theron sat on his throne, his face etched with a pallor that sent a tremor through Elara's chest. His eyes, usually sharp and penetrating, seemed clouded. His brow furrowed in a struggle she recognized, a reflection of the insidious curse she had witnessed. Lord Cale stepped forward, his rich velvet robes swishing with theatrical flair. He stood before the assembled court, his voice ringing with false gravitas. "My lords, my ladies, we gather today to confront a grave threat to our kingdom's very soul." He gestured dramatically towards Elara, his lips curling into a sneer. "This servant," Elara stands accused not only of the heinous murder of Lady Maeve, but of the dark art of sorcery. Her twisted testimony, her claims of a sweet scent upon the victim, are nothing short of a confession to the forbidden. Such an accusation, I need not remind you, is punishable by immediate death. A ripple of murmurs spread through the court, a low growl of agreement. Elara's heart pounded against her ribs. She was no longer just an accused murderer. She was a witch, a harbinger of ill omen, a target for the court's deepest fears. Kyle's words were carefully chosen, designed to ignite ancient superstitions and turn the tide irrevocably against her. He brandished a small, ornate vial, holding it aloft for all to see. "This," he declared, his voice rising, "was found in Elara's quarters. A concoction of rare herbs and other ingredients known to be used in dark rituals. Evidence, clear and undeniable, of her communion with forces beyond our understanding." Elara's mind raced. She recognized the vial. It contained simple headache remedies she sometimes brewed for the scullery maids, a mixture of chamomile and willow bark. Nothing more, but in Cale's hands it became a sinister weapon. She tried to catch Theron's eye, to convey the truth silently, but his gaze was distant, his focus seemingly fragmented. Theron stirred on his throne, a tremor running through his frame. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strained gasp escaped. He clutched the armrest, his knuckles white. This is a travesty," he managed, his voice thick and slurred, a shadow of its usual commanding tone. "Elara, she is innocent. There is no proof." His words, meant to be a defense, only fueled the court's agitation. A wave of confused whispers washed over the hall. Theron's weakened state was plain for all to see, a stark deviation from the king they knew. Kyle seized the moment, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "your noble heart leads you astray. The evidence is before us. This woman has clearly bewitched you, as she has bewitched Lady Maeve into her grave. Her influence weakens your judgment, endangers your very person." The court erupted. Accusations of sorcery, of treason, of defying the gods themselves, flew through the air. Theron tried again to speak, to assert his authority, but his voice was swallowed by the rising tide of fury, his face contorted, a sheen of sweat breaking out on his brow. The curse, Elara realized with a jolt of dread, was consuming him, sapping his strength, blurring his words. His trust in her, once a quiet, unwavering anchor, was now being used as proof of her dark influence. "She must be put to death," a voice boomed from the back of the hall. "For the safety of the kingdom," another cried. The clamour grew, a deafening roar of outrage. Elara felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her amidst the chaos. It wasn't fear, not entirely. It was a fierce, protective instinct for the king. He was fighting, not just for her, but against an unseen enemy that sought to unravel him from within. And Kyle, with his carefully crafted lies and manipulations, was merely the visible hand of that destructive force. The court's fury wasn't just aimed at her. It was a challenge to Theron's very reign, his capacity to lead. And she, a simple servant, was caught in the eye of that political storm, an unwitting pawn, yet fiercely determined not to let them break him. King's collapse. The air in the grand hall thickened, not with the smoke of the braziers, but with a palpable dread. King Theron, his voice strained from the effort of defending Elara against Coil's venomous accusations, suddenly faltered. A gasp tore through the assembly as he clutched at his chest, his knuckles bone-white, his eyes, usually sharp and commanding, glazed over with a profound pain. Elara's heart seized, a cold premonition twisting in her gut. She knew this was more than exhaustion. This was the curse, manifesting in its full, terrifying glory. A low moan escaped Theron's lips, echoing unnaturally in the sudden silence. His broad shoulders, which usually bore the weight of the kingdom with stoic grace, now slumped forward. The rich crimson of his tunic seemed to deepen as if drawing colour from his rapidly paling face. A collective murmur rippled through the court, a nervous whisper that quickly escalated into cries of alarm. Elara, still bound and shackled, felt an instinctive pull to reach him, to offer what little comfort she could. But her chains held her captive, a cruel reminder of her helplessness. Then, the true horror began. Dark, branching veins, like tendrils of shadow, began to spread across Theron's exposed skin, starting from his neck and creeping upwards towards his jawline, then down his arms. They pulsed with an eerie, internal light, a sickly violet hue that seemed to steal the very life from his flesh. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, each one a struggle. The vibrant sapphire of his eyes dimmed, replaced by a dull, unfocused stare as he fought for consciousness. Panic erupted. Courtiers screamed, some stumbling backwards, overturning chairs in their haste to distance themselves from the king's horrifying transformation. Others simply stood frozen, their faces contorted in masks of terror and disbelief, nor the carefully constructed facade of order in the court, shattered, replaced by a chaotic scramble. Guards, initially unsure how to react, now moved with frantic energy, trying to maintain some semblance of control amidst the surging fear. Lord Kyle, however, remained unnervingly still, a predator observing its prey. His eyes, narrowed to slits, gleamed with an unholy satisfaction. While others recoiled in horror, he took a step forward, his gaze fixed not on Theron's suffering, but on the symbol of his power. As the king's body convulsed, collapsing to one knee, his hand still desperately pressed against his heart, Cale moved. His movements were swift, practiced, devoid of the panic that gripped the rest of the hall. He strode past the quivering guards, past the screaming nobles, his black robes billowing like a storm cloud. His hand, though thin and predatory, reached out, not to aid the king, but to seize. The golden circlet, embellished with the fangs of the alpha wolf, the very crown that signified Theron's reign, rested precariously on the king's bowed head. Elara watched, a guttural cry tearing from her throat as Cale's fingers brushed against the polished gold. "No!" she shrieked, her voice raw with desperation, cutting through the din of the court. The chains bit into her wrists as she struggled against her bonds, a primal fury surging through her. She had seen the malevolent intent in Kyle's eyes, understood his ambition with chilling clarity. This was not about justice. It was about power, about usurpation. Theron, his body racked with pain, seemed to sense the encroaching danger, even in his clouded state. His head lifted marginally, his eyes, though clouded, flickered towards Kyle's outstretched hand, then briefly, agonizingly, to Elara. A silent plea, a flicker of trust, passed between them across the chaotic expanse of the hall. It was a look that pierced through Elara's fear, igniting a fierce determination within her. She might be a condemned servant, bound and powerless, but she would not stand by and watch this man, who had shown her a flicker of kindness, be utterly destroyed. Kyle's fingers closed around the crown, his lips curving into a triumphant sneer. The heavy silence, momentarily imposed by Elara's desperate cry, was again swallowed by the rising tide of fear and confusion. The kingdom teetered on the brink, and the man who sought to rule it was about to commit an act of ultimate betrayal. The Golden Light Lord, Kale's hand, gnarled and greedy, stretched toward Theron's head, so his fingers splayed, ready to pluck the crown from the unconscious king. The metallic glint of the circlet, once a symbol of Theron's steadfast rule, now seemed a beacon for Kyle's insidious ambition. Elara watched, a shackle biting into her wrist as she strained against the heavy chains, a silent scream tearing through her. No, not like this. The very air in the throne room felt thick, oppressive, tainted by the stench of Kyle's triumphant malice. A sudden, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in Elara's palms, a strange, tingling sensation that spread through her bound wrists, up her arms and into her chest. It was not the fire of rage, nor the cold dread of despair, but something entirely new, a gentle hum, vibrant and alive, pulsing in time with her frantic heartbeat. It felt ancient, yet utterly her own. Her eyes, as wide with horror and a dawning, incomprehensible realization, fixed on Theron's prone form. The dark veins snaking across his skin pulsed with an unnatural, malevolent rhythm, a stark contrast to the burgeoning light within her. "The king is indisposed." Kyle's voice purred, dripping with false sympathy as his fingers brushed the golden filigree of the crown. A twisted smile played on his lips, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "It falls to me, his most loyal advisor, to ensure the stability of the kingdom." He spoke to the silent guards, to the very air, asserting a claim that made Elara's blood run cold. The warmth in Elara's hands intensified, growing into a burning need, a fierce, undeniable imperative. It demanded release, sought connection. Her gaze darted from Kale's grasping hand to Theron's pallid face, the flickering shadow of the curse threatening to swallow him whole. A surge of protective fury, raw and untamed, eclipsed her fear. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her bones, that this man, this serpent, would be the end of everything Theron stood for. And she could not, would not allow it. With a guttural cry that tore from her throat, Elara pulled against her chains, a desperate, futile effort that nevertheless lent her strength. Her body shuddered with the effort, the metal biting deeper into her skin, yet she barely registered the pain. Her focus was absolute. Theron. The warmth in her hands was now a searing heat, demanding action. Instinct, primal and overwhelming, took over. Without conscious thought, she lunged forward, stretching her arms as far as her bindings would allow. Her shackled hands reaching for the fallen king, her palms, burning with an unknown power, landed on Theron's chest. The moment her skin connected with his, a blinding golden light erupted from Elara. It wasn't a gentle glow, but a sudden, explosive burst that filled the throne room, pushing back the encroaching shadows. The light pulsed with an energy that vibrated through the very stone, casting Kale's figure into sharp, momentary relief before engulfing him in its brilliance. Kyle recoiled with a sharp cry, his hand snatched away from the crown as if burned. He shielded his eyes, staggering back, his face contorted in a mixture of shock and outrage. What is this sorcery?" he shrieked, his voice losing its controlled calm, replaced by a desperate, fearful edge. The golden light surged, emanating directly from Elara's hands, now washing over Theron's prone body. Where the dark veins had pulsed with ominous intensity, the golden light now pushed back, a tangible force against the encroaching curse. The black tendrils on Theron's skin seemed to writhe, struggling against the pure, vibrant energy. Slowly, inexorably, the golden light began to consume the darkness, pushing it back, shrinking its tendrils, replacing the sickly black with a faint, healthy flush of his natural skin tone. Elara gasped, the power flowing through her, an exhilarating, terrifying current. It drained her, yet invigorated her, a paradox of energy and exhaustion. She felt the curse within Theron resist, a cold, insidious entity fighting for its hold, but the golden light, fueled by an unknown source within her, was stronger. It was a cleansing fire, a pure, unyielding force of life. Her eyes, fixed on Theron, were wide, reflecting the brilliant radiance. Her face pale but resolute. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Theron's body, a subtle shift that spoke of a battle being waged within him, not just against the curse, but against the light that sought to save him. The throne room, moments ago steeped in the heavy dread of impending usurpation, was now bathed in an ethereal glow, the air thick with the scent of ozone and something akin to blooming wildflowers. Elara, bound and vulnerable, was the conduit for a miracle. Kyle, his face a mask of furious disbelief, watched as the golden light continued its relentless assault on the king's affliction, the crown forgotten, his grand plan crumbling before his very eyes. Truth revealed, the golden light intensified, pulsing with a roar, an ancient energy that pushed back against the oppressive darkness emanating from Theron. Elara, despite the searing pain in her wrists from the chains, channeled every ounce of her will into the radiant force. Kyle, caught off guard, stumbled backward, his carefully constructed composure crumbling under the sudden, blinding display. His face, usually a mask of serene authority, contorted into a snarl of pure rage and disbelief. "What sorcery is this?" he spat, shielding his eyes with a trembling hand. As the light reached its zenith, a shudder ran through Theron's frame. His eyes, previously glazed with the murky film of the curse, snapped open, burning with a fierce, emerald intensity. The gold receded, absorbed back into Elara, leaving her breathless and drained but with a profound sense of accomplishment. She watched, her heart pounding, as Theron pushed himself up from the throne, no longer slumped and defeated, but tall, regal, and radiating an almost palpable aura of power. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, swept over the stunned court, lingering for a moment on Elara, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then it settled on Kyle, cold and condemning. "Lord Kyle," Theron's voice boomed, clear and resonant, devoid of any weakness. "You overplay your hand." Kyle, regaining some of his previous arrogance, attempted to rally. "My king, I was merely protecting the throne from this witch. She clearly laid a spell upon you, a final act of desperation to avoid justice." He gestured wildly towards Elara, his voice growing shrill. A low growl rumbled in Theron's chest, a sound that vibrated through the very stones of the hall. "Silence," he commanded. Mevin the word hung in the air, thick with unspoken threat. "Your desperation, Kyle, is far greater than hers. You sought to exploit my momentary weakness, a weakness you yourself orchestrated." A ripple of murmuring spread through the court. Theron raised a hand, silencing them instantly. "I have been plagued by a resurfacing curse, a truth you well knew, Cole. But it was not the only poison in this court. You spoke of justice, yet you have perverted it at every turn." His eyes narrowed to slits. "You accused Elara of poisoning Lord Valerius, a convenient accusation, considering you are the one who truly sought his demise." Gasps erupted, louder this time. Elara, despite her exhaustion, felt a surge of triumph. The truth. Finally, the truth. Kyle's face paled, his bravado faltering. Nonsense! I would never! This is a fabrication. Seen a lie to protect your servant girl. Is it? Theron's voice dripped with scorn. Lord Valerius was indeed poisoned, Kale, but not with the common hemlock you so eagerly pointed to. He was poisoned with a rare, undetectable concoction, one known only to a select few alchemists and to those who commissioned such dark arts. Theron paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. I found the vial, Kyle. Hidden in your private study, still containing traces of the very same substance that ended Valerius's life. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Faces turned from Theron to Kale, expressions shifting from shock to dawning horror. Theron continued, his voice gaining momentum. And the motive? Valerius was on the verge of exposing your illicit dealings, your attempts to destabilize the northern territories for your own gain. He was a threat to your carefully laid plans for power, just as Elara became a convenient scapegoat, a distraction to shift suspicion away from yourself. Kyle began to tremble, his gaze darting around the room as if seeking an escape. This is a conspiracy, a trick. A trick, Kale? Theron's voice was laced with cold fury. You conspired with the apothecary, Master Thorn, who supplied you with the poison. He confessed under duress, admitting he feared your retribution if he refused. He also corroborated your threats against Elara, your demands that she be framed for the murder. The court was stunned into silence. Thorn, a respected figure, had been seen with Kyle frequently in recent weeks. The pieces clicked into place, forming a horrifying tapestry of betrayal. Theron turned his gaze, which had softened slightly, back to Elara. Elara, the accusations against you were false. Your name is cleared. You are free. A wave of relief washed over Elara, so profound it nearly buckled her knees. The weight of the world, which had pressed down on her for weeks, suddenly lifted. She was innocent. The words, so simple yet so powerful, echoed in her mind. The chain still bound her, but mentally she was unbound. Justice, however belated, had finally arrived. A new beginning. The collective gasp that rippled through the great hall was palpable, a wave of shock and dawning comprehension. Kale's face, a mask of fury and disbelief, contorted further as the royal guard, spurred by Theron's resolute command, moved with swift efficiency. His protests were guttural, a strangled mix of outrage and threats, but they were drowned out by the metallic clang of manacles snapping shut around his wrists. He struggled, a desperate, undignified thrashing, but the guards were unyielding, their grip like iron. This is treason! I am a lord of this realm! Kyle shrieked, his eyes darting frantically, searching for allies where none remained. His gaze snagged on Elara, a venomous glare that promised retribution. But the power behind it was gone, replaced by impotent rage. Theron watched, his expression unreadable, as the man who had nearly destroyed his kingdom and his life was dragged away. The sounds of Coil's struggle faded into the distance, leaving an almost deafening silence in its wake. The air, once thick with tension and suspicion, now hummed with a different kind of energy, the quiet aftermath of a storm. Elara, still chained, felt the raw exhaustion settle deep into her bones. The ancient energy, though successfully channeled, had taken its toll. Her limbs trembled, and a dull ache throbbed behind her eyes, yet a profound sense of peace, a quiet triumph, bloomed in her chest. Her name was cleared. The truth had prevailed. Theron turned then, his gaze sweeping over the assembled court, lingering for a moment on the hushed faces of the nobles. Their expressions, a mix of relief, shame, and a nascent respect, spoke volumes. He then fixed his eyes on Elara. The deep blue of his irises held an intensity that made her breath catch, a silent language passing between them that transcended words. He walked towards her, his movements fluid and purposeful. With a nod, one of the guards stepped forward, keys jingling softly, while the heavy iron chains that had bound her for so long fell away with a clatter, each link a symbolic release. Elara rubbed her wrists, the skin beneath the cold metal raw and tender, but the discomfort was a small price to pay for the freedom she now tasted. Theron reached out, not quite touching her, but his hand hovered near her arm, a gesture of protective instinct. "Elara," he said, his voice resonating with an authority that left no room for doubt. "You have endured unimaginable hardship. You have faced injustice with courage, and against all odds, you have saved this kingdom and me." His words, spoken with such conviction before the entire court, were a public exoneration, a balm to her weary soul. A faint flush rose to her cheeks, but she met his gaze without flinching. The unspoken bond between them, forged in the crucible of shared peril and quiet understanding, shimmered in the space between them. It was a connection that had deepened with every silent exchange, every shared burden, every moment of unexpected solace found in the other's presence. He paused, then continued, his voice softer, yet still carrying to the farthest corners of the hall. "Lord Kael's treachery has been exposed. He manipulated the court, orchestrated the murder of Lord Valerius to prevent his illicit dealings from coming to light, and framed you for his crimes. Your name is cleared, and your place by my side is acknowledged, not as a servant, but as a protector of this realm." The last phrase hung in the air, weighty with implications. Protector of this realm. It was more than just a public declaration. It was a promise, a glimpse into a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Her unique power, the ancient energy that had flowed through her to break the curse, was no longer a hidden burden, but a recognized force. As Theron's gaze deepened, a quiet understanding passed between them. It wasn't just about the curse or Kyle's betrayal, it was about the silent conversations, the shared vulnerability, the nascent, tender feelings that had blossomed amidst the chaos. The world had shifted on its axis, and she found herself standing at the precipice of a new beginning. She looked around the great hall, no longer seeing herself as the wrongfully accused servant girl, but as someone intricately woven into the fate of this kingdom, connected to its Alpha King in a way she couldn't yet fully comprehend. The path ahead was uncertain, so fraught with new challenges and expectations, but for the first time in a long time, Elara felt a surge of hope, a quiet strength that promised a future where her purpose and her connection to Theron would shape the very destiny of the land. The ordeal had ended, but her story, their story, had just begun.